Hello. So Sharon, Commissioner Conard Wells is stuck in traffic. Councilwoman Andujar is delayed, she's on her way. So we do have quorum, I think we're gonna get going, so it's not to delay. As soon as our wonderful clerk tells us it's recording. Good evening, folks. Welcome to the Special Commission for Taxation and Revenue regular meeting. I'm Councilwoman Joanne Ryan. Monday, November 27th, it is 5:03 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you kindly read the roll?
Councilwoman Joanne Ryan.
Present.
Councilor Sue Andujar is absent.
So far.
Councilman Pedro Espinal.
Present.
Michael Olivier.
Present.
Lawrence Mancini.
Present.
Tom Savaras.
Here.
Sharon Conard Wells is absent. Jane Driver.
Present.
Robert Stolzman.
Here.
We have 7 present, 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. So first, let me recognize my council colleague, Miguel Sanchez is with us this evening. Thank you, Councilman, for joining us. And kind of being a regular at these meetings. We appreciate that. Okay. Oh, yes, please, please. Okay. So we're also admitting Lisa Fries, Solicitor Fries, who is joining us via Zoom. I have some questions for her that I want to ask her, and that's the best way to get her at this time. Time is of the essence. As you all know, we have a pretty tight schedule that we have to keep. So Lisa, can you hear us? Solicitor Fries, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, awesome. We can hear you as well. Thank you very much for joining us. I also see we have our tax assessor, Janice. Thank you very much for being here, as well as Mr. Murphy. Thank you. Okay, without further ado, let's have the clerk read item 1 into the record, please.
Item number 1, broad discussion of city tax structure, multifamily dwellings. Following has been invited, Gregory Weiss and John Moody of the Providence Apartment Association.
Wonderful, and you're already seated at the table. You folks have done this before. I'm getting a good sense of that. I appreciate you making time to join us. Let's get them sworn in, please.
Absolutely. Can you raise your right hand? Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and titles for the record, please.
Gregory Weiss, property manager.
John Dooley. Property management developer.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, for the commission's consumption this evening, the gentleman before us had provided 3 handouts, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so I'm gonna get these into the record before we get started. Has everyone gotten a copy? No? Okay, let's hand out all 3. Is that to your liking? All 3 will be
Sure,
distributed?
yeah.
Okay. Not in any order. I'll wait until they're distributed, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
She is? No, sorry about that. No problem. Let the record reflect that we are being joined by Councilwoman Andujar. So moved. Thank you kindly. Okay. Have we got full distribution? Okay. let me know. Let me know when the committee has, that's it.
We do, Madam Chair.
Again, so that we can move along here, let me know when the committee has. Okay, I need to, get these into, exhibits, so let's start with Exhibit P, a document entitled Taxation and Revenue, multi-page, document, may I call that Exhibit P? Vice Chair makes that motion.
Second.
Councilman Espinal seconds that motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have Exhibit P. Exhibit Q is the next one. It is a PowerPoint slide entitled Providence Apartment Association Presentation to the Special Committee for Taxation and Revenue. It's a multi-slide document. May I have a motion to make that Exhibit Q made by Vice Chair
Second.
Didier, seconded by Councilman Espinal. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. We have Q entered. And then the last document is, appears to be a text, document of text, multi-pages. That is entitled Taxation of Class 2 Residential Past Practice Statutory Deposit and Policy Considerations Appendix to Providence Apartment Association. That's a big, long title. We're gonna call that Exhibit R. May I have that motion?
Second.
Motion made by Vice Chair Didier, second by Councilman Espinal, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. So we have 3 exhibits, and before us this evening, we have the Providence Apartment Association, represented by Gregory Weiss and John Dooley. I thank you, gentlemen, for joining this discussion. I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes.
Good. So we're ready to have a healthy discussion.
Okay,
So
great.
please take it away.
All right, yeah, we're gonna talk tonight, you guys are here for, about everyone's favorite subject, taxation. There's so many things that everybody wants to be able to do. And the problem is, in council, you guys, and every person, you gotta try to figure out, well, how the heck you gonna pay for this? You can't. It always seems that so many people, want government to do this and that and this, but, when it comes time to actually paying for it, they want someone else to pay for it. And Providence, I think, has gotten into trouble in the last 30 years or so, because we've been pushing our tax structure way out of balance in terms of owner-occupieds, non-owner-occupieds, and commercial. And I will present the numbers and the facts, and this is it, and this is what has happened in the last couple of years. A lot of times, this kind of stuff is really critical, because there are a lot of unintended consequences when people decide to do things. Example I have here, which is actually what made our organization, got us to form, we didn't exist before this happened. 2011, the reevaluation.
John, may I just interrupt you, sir?
Sure.
Which one are you presenting on?
I'm on this one.
That is the document, that is Exhibit P, Taxation and Revenue. So
Correct.
commission members, if you can draw your attention to that one, and please continue. I apologize for the interruption.
No problem. I don't know if you guys know, some people know more than others. I didn't know anything about it 12 years ago before this happened, but then we had become instant experts. A lot of people we found on the council and also the mayor's office didn't even know the real history of the homestead in Providence. In 2011, there was a big cut in state aid to the city. They needed to come up with $20 million. So they said, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll just get rid of the homestead for the owner-occupied landlords, the non-owner-occupied landlords. Thank you.
That's why you're here, Greg.
That's right. Not just to look good, but, it's just, and the problem was, that was in the middle of all the big housing crisis that was going on, okay? It was a bad situation, especially in the poorer parts of town. A lot of people upside down in their buildings, especially in the poorer parts of town. People ended up, the taxes went up a few $100, $500 or something, but they didn't have it, okay? And so then they all got foreclosed on it, and all 3 people in that family got evicted. And now so you have more and more of the poorest, most vulnerable people in our city out competing for apartments, and that's driving up apartment costs. A lot of these things and a lot of policies, you gotta really focus on what is the effect gonna be on rents from these different policies. And this is a huge example of totally I know they didn't mean for that to happen. But supposedly, I did have some city council people at the time, none of them are currently on the council, but said, well, what are you guys so upset about that we raised your rents, your taxes so much, you'll just raise your rents to cover it. Which I think is kind of cynical, to think that the poorest people, the renters in the city, should have to pay a bigger burden than, so that the owner-occupied single-family people don't have to just pay a little bit more in taxes. And, because that's what happened. So if you turn to the next page, this is a history of the homestead. Homestead was designed to help owner-occupied people get a little bit of a bump. When they first had it in Providence, everybody got the same homestead. The reason being, the state of Rhode Island passed a law saying that you couldn't charge commercial rate that was more than double the residential rate. So Providence at the time said, oh, this will be a great idea. We'll just give everybody a homestead. So our commercial rate was at the time something like 35. And we'll make the residential rate, everyone will get a homestead. So that'll knock it down to 22 for everyone. Okay? And then that went along. So a lot of times you'll see on this list, there's what the homestead, so then they decided, well, we want to give an advantage, a little bit of a bump to the owner-occupied people. So we'll have two homesteads, one for owner-occupied and one for non. So if you look at the far column, that's what I call the effective homestead. That's what the homestead really is, okay? And if you look just to the left of that, you'll see when it has what the rate is for the owner-occupied, non-occupied, what the differential is, how much more does someone pay? Like if you lived in a house, a multifamily building, and there was one right next door that the landlord didn't live in, or you own both of them, which is very common in Providence, you're gonna be paying a lot more in taxes, we were just mentioning that in your own building, for that building. In fact, when they first put it in, there was like a 23% homestead, which is normally, when you have a homestead in most places, it's 20 to 30%. Yes.
Hold on a second.
Sorry.
Commissioner Sagoras, do you want to continue through your presentation before we ask questions?
You
or-
can ask the question.
Okay,
Since I don't-
Commissioner
I don't.
Sagoras, please continue.
I just want you to be a little clearer about the arithmetic that's going on in this table.
Yeah.
I don't understand the calculation of the homestead, of the effective homestead, or the differential number that you're talking about. Could you just
Sure.
describe what the arithmetic is?
Right, so if you start like in 2001,
I mean, just to be clear, the occupied and non-occupied, this column is actually the rates from the city.
Those are the
No.
homestead
The
exemptions
homestead
From the
exemption,
city.
those are the exemptions.
but those are the
from the city.
city, okay.
Right.
But this column and this column, could you review the?
Sure, yes, if you look at, for instance, the first one, 2001, the owner occupied rate was $22.80.
Yep.
The non-owner occupied rate was $29.64, which means if the exact same building right next to each other, you could own both of them. And in one of them, you're gonna be paying 30% more taxes.
And that's.
Assuming the same value.
And the 22.8 and the 2280 and the 2964, that's the rate after the different exemptions.
Correct.
Okay, that's good. And the effective homestead number?
The effective homestead, one city gave a 33% homestead for the owner occupieds and a 13 for the non-owner occupieds. So at the time, they listed, I'll have to do the math to figure out, they had a separate residential rate that actually nobody paid. They gave homesteads to both categories of customers.
But where did this number come from?
Which number?
This effective homestead number?
If you do the math, it has to do with if they actually had a residential rate that non-owner occupieds paid. In other words, the owner occupied rate is 29.64. If you look up in the state, they would say that the residential rate at Providence was like 35. But they don't pay, no one pays. Non-owner occupied got one homestead. The other guy's owner occupied got a bigger homestead. So it's just kind of a lot of smoke and mirrors to confuse everybody on what the tax rates really are.
Okay, thank you.
Is everybody clear on that? If you just had one homestead, one rate that the people who owned the building and didn't live there paid, and that was a residential rate, and one homestead that was the benefit that the people got, that's what the effective homestead is.
Never mind, I think I understand it. I think the answer I was looking for, that Larry pulled out his calculator and reminded me that I have one too.
Larry's good with numbers.
I think the answer that I was looking for was only just that the effective homestead is the inverse of the differential number that you calculated.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and that's, so the effective homestead around 23, then they raised it to 25, and that's places that have homesteads, that's usually where it is. And I'll show you in a second, what some of the other cities and towns in Rhode Island that have homesteads, what they charge. A lot of them don't have any homesteads. But the ones even that do, I'll show you what theirs are. And when that big jump happened in 2011, that's where it went all the way up. They ended up completely getting rid of that 15. They got rid of the 33%. So the taxes on people, the differential ended up being double. So if you live there, you paid half the rate, half the tax bill of the guy right next door, the same exact building. And what that did was it shot up everybody's tax bill, especially in the poorest parts of town where they just couldn't afford to do that. So they got foreclosed on, everybody got evicted. People remember it was dark days, and that's what I'm talking about. At the time, I don't think anyone wanted that to happen on the council. It just seemed like this was a quick fix. But what it did was Rhode Island led all of New England foreclosures per capita. Providence led Rhode Island, and 80% of them were multi-family properties. So at the time, I got hurt by it. I also had a side business. My wife worked, and I got through it. There's a lot of other people in poorest parts of town that didn't, and it's just foreclosures right down the street. In fact, Miguel Luna was a city councilman in South Providence back then, and he told me, I was saying that how bad this was. He said, John, the only good thing that came out of this homestead mess back in 2011 is it got you involved down here, working on this stuff. And I was trying to survive. I built up my business, and I could have lost everything myself, which was really dicey at the time. So anyway, we went along like that, and then they raised it even more. So then it got up to 41% homestead, which means you're paying 70% more if you don't live there. Most recently, in 2012, it went up to a 45% homestead, which meant that you're paying 82% more for one building than the other one. If you go to, and what does that really mean though? You guys can go to this one with the little picture of the houses. It kind of jumps around town, show you different neighborhoods and how it affected them. Well, a lot of these are on the same street. They're all within like a block of each other. This is a neighborhood over in Silver Lake. You can see in 2018, the tax bill for the single family house was $3,300.28, $3,328. And then by 2022, it was down to $2,737. The value of that house went up from 177,000 to 279. Almost double. But the tax bill actually went down. The next multifamily, which was right around the corner from it, is owner occupied. Their tax bill actually went up slightly, or decreased 22%. And the non-owner occupied one, it went up 28%. Take a look at the next picture. This is over in kind of an Oldville neighborhood. In 2018, the tax bill was 3157. But by 2022, it was down under $3,000. And again, the property value almost doubled. You look next door, right next door, you can see the blue of a single family house in the picture in the middle one. The tax bill went up 15%, increased 15%. Okay, the property value went up, and the taxes increased in that one. And then in the non-owner occupied one, it increased 33%. So what you have here is a shifting of the tax liability from multifamily buildings away from single family buildings. And that's the problem with the homestead, is it's the most regressive type of taxation you can have. The wealthiest people with the most expensive single family houses on the east side, which is the next street here. Even there's a little house here, that's actually comes in.
Okay, let's just,
Okay, I'm just saying, it's a small house. In those same years, 2018 to 2022, in 4 years, again, it almost doubled in value. The tax bill went down by 17%. The more expensive house here in the middle, again, went from 580,000 to 927,000, and the tax bill went down by 17%. A multifamily right down the street, that's non-owner occupied, the tax bill went up 56%. So when people talk about rents are out of control in Providence, the problem is when you shift so much of the tax burden onto the landlords, they either have to raise rents on people, or they get foreclosed on because they can't meet their obligations. Another thing that's come up, it's sort of on the back side of the sheet that I showed you guys first. Some people talk about how the single family houses on the east side, say, well, my tax bill is so high. I've yet to meet anyone who didn't think their tax bill was high, it wasn't high enough. I don't know, everyone, whatever it is, it's high, but it's compared to what? And if you look at like the single family rate, on this sheet, this comes right off the state website. That's not this year, it was from last year. They haven't gotten around to putting this year's numbers up yet. But a lot of people say, well, yeah, because I have $1 million house, I pay a really high tax bill. Well, that's nice, you have $1 million house. If you had that same house down in Barrington or East Greenwich, your tax bill would be almost double. So this idea that, well, at the east side and the wealthiest communities, we pay most of the taxes in the town, because you're living in $1 million house. You know, if I lived in $1 million house, I'd be paying more taxes. I pay as much for my house that's more like half that, because the tax rates are so much higher in all the other states. But in terms of a lot of the multifamilies and stuff, if you look at this sheet here that says Providence, by far the highest homestead rates and the lowest tax rates.
is that in our package?
It should be in your packet. I think it's printed the other way. It's printed on a board. If you look at, these are the most recent taxes, okay, and most recent rates. Providence, 1835, and this is shows, okay, so then that's what the non-owner occupied landlords pay. The owner occupied pay 1046 per thousand, and commercial is at 35. Okay, we have a 43% homestead. which is like double anyone else that has a homestead. North Providence, you can see the numbers, 20% homestead. Johnston, 20% homestead. East Providence, 14% homestead. Cranston, Pawtucket, and Warwick don't have any homestead. When you look at the 6-city average, the non-owner occupied rate, we're paying up more than it, 5% more. The owner occupied people in Providence are paying 34% less than the other states. You know, when we go to the state and ask for help financially, they knew that, well, you guys are paying a lot less in property taxes than all the other cities and towns. Now you want the state to bail you out. I don't think that's gonna go over so well. But what I wanna do is, and then the commercial rate, which is also much more. So the problem with this homestead rate is it ends up being very unprogressive, very regressive. It's the most benefit to people, the most expensive owner-occupied houses, and hurts the landlords. And then we end up having to pass it on to the tenants. Either people don't want to get into this business and you know, become landlords, or you end up having to pass it on, and everyone's talking about it. You know, this problem is the rents are going crazy and stuff like that. Well, yeah, our expenses are going crazy, and we have to be able to pass it on, or we're going to go out of business. Most landlords in Providence, 70% of Providence multifamily landlords own 3 or fewer buildings. Okay, there's a couple of big guys out there who own a lot of stuff, but most of the buildings are owned by people that only have a few. And they're getting creamed.
Commissioner Stelzner?
Real quick, just so I'm following that. So far, we've been talking about 6 units or less.
Correct.
And homestead exemptions are non-owner occupied. And then I see in the materials quickly, we'll talk about commercial rates.
I'm gonna speak to that.
But, oh, great. Is the 70% ownership, or is the 70, what's the ratio roughly, if you know this, between 6-unit and fewer apartments and 7 units or greater apartments? What's, if we have 1,000 apartments in Providence, I know we have more.
I don't have the exact number, but
Roughly.
most of them in Providence are 2s and 3s. That's an overwhelming majority.
I think the assessor would answer that better than.
Okay.
we could.
I think we may have even seen that
Yeah.
prior to it, because I just don't remember. I apologize for
That's
interrupting,
fine.
sorry, Madam Chair.
That's okay. Any other questions for Mr. Dooley? John, have you finished your
Yes,
presentation?
I finished,
Okay.
so.
Do we want to go right in? Okay, Commissioner
Other
Flores?
questions?
Or, I mean, is this our moment to question you, or we'll come back afterward?
If you wanna ask John.
If you wanna ask
They're
questions
leaving,
about-
it's just, they're bifurcating their presentation, that's
No,
all.
I'll save it for after.
Okay,
for after.
I think
So-
that would be prudent.
I'm
So,
going
Mr.
to,
Wise,
be presenting this packet,
thank you.
we've also supplied you with like a technical paper, very technical. We are not gonna present that information to you tonight, but you can read it. If you're really interested in the history of how everything came about, it's all laid out in the summarized. John mentioned we're from the Providence Apartment Association. We formed to advocate, to try to make a fair and healthy real estate environment for all stakeholders. And in 2010, that we really started coalescing when there was a drastic change in taxes. So by the way, I've been watching all your guys' the commission's meetings, and thank you for that. Very in-depth look, and it's a very important issue to me. And you'll see I used one of the slides from one of your meetings because I thought it was excellent.
You harvested a slide.
It's a little bit hard to read here, but the point I'm trying to get across is in 2015, sort of like John was mentioning, you have a owner-occupied house, the average tax is $4,300. And then in 2023, the average tax on those houses is $4,400. So it went up, I guess, less than $100 in that time. I've circled below it, just a 3-family, but you could pick any of them. that don't have a homestead. In 2015, it was about $5,300. In 2023, it's $7,941. So you can see there's a giant increase on the multifamily, non-owner occupied, and almost none on the owner occupied. And I think you guys mentioned that when you saw the slide. So that would be referring to buildings of 5 or less. So on my next slide, I'm also harvesting a slide, but this time we're looking at the commercial apartment buildings. That would be 6 or more. So this, I think, might be the most important slide in my presentation because it's shocking to me. In 2015, see the first line is apartment buildings. The average taxes paid is $26,194. And in 2023, we've doubled. We're at $51,133. I mean, what else do I need to say? That's just glaring. But I also thought I'd make a point that COVID had an effect on the commercial realm. And kind of depressed values of offices, hotels, retail, and they didn't get that much of an increase. And I think some of that burden, not only was burden being shifted from the owner occupied, but I think burden was being shifted from some of the other parts of commercial onto apartment buildings.
Greg, could you please define an apartment building? You've got 505.
I believe this 505 is referring to buildings with 6 apartments or more. There is also the mixed use combination. My understanding of that is that's when you maybe have a store on the first floor and maybe an apartment or 2 upstairs. But I think if it's the building is primarily apartments, it's even if it has a small retail component, I believe it's called an apartment building.
And the interesting thing about the numbers is the 6-unit apartment, there's 254 in the city of Providence units.
6.
254
Okay.
out of the 505 are 6
So
units,
half of them.
which I think is really significant.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Buildings.
buildings, yeah, 6-unit buildings. I'm sorry. Okay, please continue.
So my next slide, I'm going to sort of compare best I can Providence to national taxes. Now, I don't have everybody in Providence's income, but I can tell you about the properties that I manage and how they compare. So this is an infographic I got from the National Apartment Association, where they survey people from all over the country, and they determined for 2023, 11 cents of every dollar of rent goes to pay property taxes. I know for the buildings of 6 or more that I manage, 22 cents of every dollar goes to property taxes. And I know other members of our association have told me they're paying 30 cents or 30% of their gross revenue goes right to the taxes. So we are way, way higher than we depend on property taxes for revenue. And then even for the 5 units or less, we're still 17 cents compared to the national of 11 cents. My next slide is going to talk a little about how tax increases impact renters. So again, I'm going to speak to my own experience. In 2022, the properties managed by my company received a tax bill increase of 34% in total. That was a revale year. And so I did the math, and if I were to ask the tenants to make that up all in one jump in 1 year, that would be equivalent to $76.74 per month per tenant. They have to pay more in rent. And that's just to break even with the tax increase. Now, this is a time of record inflation, utilities, labor, materials, everything. So obviously, we would have probably had to raise rent if the taxes were had stayed the same. So, you know, I'm usually would raise a rent like $20, $25. I mean, you guys want to know why the rents are so high. This is not helpful, for sure. So tax increases do lead to rent increases, and they also put upward pressure on the market overall. I mean, there's a lot of things that make the rental market, but the property tax is certainly a big one. And I also talked to a number of landlords that said, we do 12-month leases, which what I do. It's what I do. And they're saying, well, I'm afraid I'm gonna get caught with one of these drastic increases in the middle of a term, and I'm not gonna be able to raise the rents. So I'm gonna raise the rent more now, just so I can get ahead of it, and not be fall behind. So, you know, that's another reason why rents are going up. And I think the current tax rates disproportionately affect these buildings with 6 or more, which is exacerbating the housing prices and the high rents. It also discourages density and creation of more units, which is really the only way long-term we're going to lower the rents, is more units, supply and demand. So I know of people that have eliminated their 6th unit because they did the math and they said, I'm gonna get to that lower tax category. I'm not, why deal with this extra apartment? I can make more money leaving it empty. Take out the kitchen and it's not an apartment anymore. So, I mean, that's amazing. We should use our tax structure to incentivize more housing and lower rent, but that's completely the opposite. So, you know, we need a policy to determine what we want to achieve and execute that. Some of the things John was mentioning, since renters typically have lower incomes than homeowners on average, the homestead tends to make property tax systems more regressive. I already touched on that one. What are other reasons rents are high? So my next slide is talking about buildings with 6 or more units. So here's an odd example that I've observed. You have a building with 6 small studio apartments. They're paying $35.10 per 1,000. And then you compare that to a large 3-family building that might have 5 bedrooms in each unit. So that's 15-bedroom house versus 6 efficiencies. Well, the 15-bedroom house, if it's non-owner occupied, that's $18.35 per 1,000. But if an owner lives in one, they're only paying $10.46 per 1,000. I mean, that's so the 6 studios is paying a tax rate over 3 times the owner occupied. Well, so I feel like if you want more density, more units, you know, that really sums it up why maybe it's discouraging people to add more units. The commercial tax rate is it's onerous and uncompetitive with nearby towns, and it discourages development without subsidy. I know you guys talked about TSAs, and a lot of you in here work hard to get TSAs, and they are valuable tools. But some of the people in my group also feel like when they're paying the full tax rate, well, they feel like they're having to subsidize some of the newer luxury buildings in Providence who are not paying a full rate. And a lot of their houses are aging housing stock that need a lot of improvements, nonstop preventative maintenance. So maybe, you know, why are they paying full boat and the guys with the new luxury places? You know, some of them have renewed the TSAs for more than 1 term. Just sometimes it feels a little bit unfair. But we do need to get new development in the city, so there's got to be a balance. So we need a tax structure that allows property owners to maintain and operate these buildings and provide somewhat of affordable housing options for our residents. The next slide is just a short history on the tax rates for buildings with 6 or more units. And you can see from 2003 to 2012, I think it was actually started before 2003, but I couldn't fit any more on this thing. But there was a homestead exemption given on the first 5 units of any building that was 6 or more. So effectively, you were taxed on the first 5 units, the same as a 500 non-owner occupied building. So it was like sort of a blended rate. So even though in 2003, the commercial rate was 38.82, you were getting this benefit of 13% homestead on the first 5 units. So you didn't really pay 38.82 on the whole building. So that's no longer. And I really want to advocate for you guys considering bringing that back, because I thought it was a great way to recognize that this is housing. It's not purely commercial use. You know, why does it pay the same tax as Walmart and Starbucks? You know, we're talking about housing. And you don't really get the economies of scale once you reach that 6th unit that you're paying the full boat commercial rate. You know, if you had 100 apartments, yeah, I guess there's some economies of scale there that maybe you could pay the full.
And I just want to jump in for a second, because you know what, I don't even have like one of these bigger, like 6 to 12 unit buildings, but that's the problem. They're older buildings, they're old wood, we come on lead paint, all these different issues, things you gotta deal with that you don't have to deal with a newer construction, you know, 20, 30, 50 apartment building. Okay, so they're really expensive per unit to maintain. And they pay, like, they get creamed, they don't get any economies of scale. And those are the guys, like, personally, like, the guys who own threes and stuff like me, to me, this thing's out of whack. But that can be adjusted and get it closer to where it should be. The 6 to 12 thing is just way out of whack. I mean, those guys are just getting crushed. And again, anytime we do things like this, they're forced, they gotta raise rents to try to cover these expenses, or we're gonna be back in the foreclosure thing, where people aren't gonna be able to make enough money. You know, you gotta be able to pay to maintain these buildings and to do these things. And the fact that to say a 6-unit building pays the same tax rate as like a 60-unit building is just kind of crazy. So I think that's something that you guys can work on, try to figure out some kind of compromise that, you know, really. And again, the other thing about it is, what did you say earlier, trying to do was 500 units or something like that. In terms of the number of units, you know, what we have in housing, it's not a ton of places. It's, you know, 250 or something of these buildings that are like, they talk about like the donut hole, like parents complaining down with you know, their insurance and stuff like that, where they end up getting creamed. It's like they're big, they're too big that they're big enough now that they have to pay the whole commercial rate, but they don't get really the benefits of being a 20, 30, 60.
So I'm gonna wrap up with some of my solutions and ideas, you know, that we've discussed with our group, and you guys could consider one of them, or any of them, or a hybrid of them, however would work for you guys. But I'm gonna mention again, prior to 2013, for over a decade, the city did the non-owner occupied homestead for the first 5 apartments in a building of 6 and more. And I think that would be my preference. Another idea that people have mentioned is changing that threshold from 6 units to maybe 12 units. And that's where you start to get taxed at the commercial rate. This goes to what John said, you know, once you get to that 6th unit, you're not all of a sudden, it's not like something switched off and you've got all this benefit of being a giant building with on-site management and it's a brand new building, which one of the large buildings are. Or you could consider doing what West Warwick does. It created another tax rate solely for buildings with 6 or more units. Lower than the commercial rate, but higher than the non-owner occupied. Maybe this is the easiest for you to implement because it's similar to understand, but I think it gives less relief to the smaller apartment buildings and spreads it out, you know, to everybody that's 6+. So, you know, in favor of the other options. That helping the smaller buildings.
Interesting, very interesting. That was a great presentation. Did you have a question?
If I may just,
Commissioner Stoltzfus, please.
if, on your last points, which I've disclosed with other hearings, I tend to represent developers and landlords, so probably disposed to agree with what you're saying, as opposed to some other people that have a different practice or different background. But it seems to me what you're advocating for is something we've been talking about or talking around, and that is the notion that we tax housing units as commercial property. And sometimes they're not. They're homestead or they're a combination. Do you get to this, my question is, do you get to the same result? It's just a math question. Do you get to the same result if we treated the homestead exemption for homesteads, full stop? If you live there, if it's owner occupied, that unit gets a homestead exemption. And then we treated residential units, whether it's 1, 5, 6, or 106, at a different rate. Does that get us to the same place policy-wise, if the numbers are correct?
Yeah, I don't think we have the resources to figure that out. The city maybe does, but it's an idea. It's definitely an idea.
But
The idea is lesser homes. I guess what we are saying is the homestead can be very generous, and the commercial, the rate on the rest of the housing units is very high.
Because the testimony we've heard prior to this and some is pretty clear that one of the things we're doing unintentionally, in addition to taxing housing units a little differently than we tax other commercial properties, they're truly commercial in the sense that someone buys either a triple decker or a 150 unit building strictly as an investment and a management opportunity to manage an investment and to get a return on that investment, an ROI that meets a certain pro forma that investor wants to achieve. But the other unintended consequences that we have in our housing stock in the city particularly are long-term residents, either long-term renters or long-term residents that are subject to the vagaries of assessments and valuation changes. And especially, unfortunately, especially the long-term single-family homeowner that has seen a disproportionate rise in valuation versus income to pay the taxes. So we're sensitive to that. So I thank you for your testimony, because I think what it does is gives us another tool, which we haven't discussed directly, and that's a third tax rate, a rate for residential, a rate for commercial, and a rate for residential units. And we've done that, it looks like we've done that by backdooring in through homestead exemptions, and we might do some research independently, Madam Chair, on, my memory is the city did have a different apartment rate at some point. I just don't know if my memory is clear on that.
So you raise a good point, and I wanted to ask the solicitor, Lisa Freeze, can you weigh in on, we've heard about historical treatment of apartment houses. We've heard some ideas or solutions that have been presented by the gentleman here today. So I have a number of questions, but one, clarify the history. There's been some change over time. History was presented today that the apartment owners or small apartments were treated differently. They had a different rate. And I guess I want to understand what legislation changed over time that allowed that to happen. Can you opine on the legislative history first?
I'm not sure that I know that. I'm remembering the city had authority at one time to have all real estate as one class. I want to say it was like, now repealed, but it was like 44.5, 20.7, I think, and it was basically the equivalent of an exemption for residential property that applied to real estate containing 6 or fewer dwellings.
Yes.
So I think that's what we're talking about. I would need to pull it up and remember exactly what it did, but it's certainly something that didn't carry forward and is the kind of legislation that I think folks are suggesting around this table.
Okay.
Yes, please. Mr. Weiss.
The technical one sheet paper that we giving you, that's the information that it sort of speaks to, and, you know, it's.
It was something about, Janice, maybe you remember seeing it, something about the result of dividing assessed value by number of dwelling units multiplied by a variable. Is any of this ringing a bell, Janice?
I think I'm finding it in here. All right, you know what, I think what we'll do is we'll just ask you to review the legislation and give us a memo to the committee as opposed to.
Yeah, I think that was sunset, but something we could revisit.
I would appreciate that. I also would appreciate you, giving us some guidance on these 3 recommended, asks, if you will, or ideas, that were presented, by the Apartment Association prior to 2013. Over a decade, the city gave a non-occupied homestead to the first 5. That was kind of what I was just talking about. And then the second one is change the threshold from 6 to 12 units to be taxed at the commercial rate, creating a special group, if you will, or assessed class. And then there's a West Warwick model. Does everybody remember us seeing the West Warwick model tax structure? Where they basically have different, did everybody get that?
Yeah, that's in this package.
It is in our packet. I've got so many pieces of legislation, it isn't even funny. But the West Warwick model creates different classifications of real estate. Single family homes, condo, there's class 1, more than 2 dwellings, and then there's a class 2 residential real estate containing 2, 3, 4, 5 dwellings, except for 2 dwelling units, one of which is owner occupied. They've got a whole scenario here of owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. They create a special class for 6 or more dwellings. Commercial and industrial real estate is taxed, and residential properties containing or commercial properties that have residential properties in it. So it's a whole classification. That's what you guys are alluding to in this West Warwick model. So what I'm going to do is, I think that there's a lot going on. I myself have been going back and forth between different legislation that's before us. I think what we've unearthed here is the fact that there's been a steep increase in what multifamily apartment houses, small apartment houses, if you will, whether it be from 6 or 5 up to maybe 12 have seen, and that's probably about 320 units of that 500 over time. Just give me a second and I'll opine. But we've seen that you've been charged, and you've expressed this before to council members during budget hearings. There's been an additional burden that you guys have withstood over time. And we've seen the homestead exemption providing a greater benefit to the lower income or the single family properties. And the homestead kept getting bigger to try to push some relief. There was a lot of things going on, but I think, to me, I think we need to be more transparent in how we're taxing everyone, whether it's a single family, whether it's a multi. And I do think we need to come up with some rubric that makes sense, some tax structure. I'm liking the West Warwick model, but I think we should probably have some refinement of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the solicitor to look at these 3 solutions or suggestions that you've come up with to address your pain, if you will. And then I'm going to ask the tax assessor and our finance people to maybe run some numbers and look at what, West Warwick came up with a model. Obviously, they had some similar issues, but we are not West Warwick. So let's see if we can look at Providence's situation or problem, if you will, to provide a fair, more transparent model. You had your hand up, and then I'm going to go Commissioner Driver.
Yeah, really quickly, I just wanted to,
get some clarification on what Brown and Risby and Johnson pay on their bills as far as taxes go? Is that exempt or is that part of the tax stabilization they get? Because if I owned a three-family, this one that pays almost $14,000 a year, and I rented that up to Brown students, I would pay, that's what I pay. But how does that compare to the residential buildings that these institutions are building and putting students in? I don't know. Madam Assessor, do you want to try to respond to that?
I need some clarity. Are you saying that there's like 6+ units?
Yeah, so there's a big dorm on the east side that's filled with Brown students that parents are paying $1 zillion for.
The university owns it,
Yes, yes.
the tax exempt.
So even their dorms are tax exempt, even though Brown is, not just Brown, but they're making money from, if I had a kid that went to Brown, paying them
Yes.
a lot of money. So how come? What is that?
Can I speak there for a second? As I actually have a son.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Driver, did you get your answer? I'm getting it, yeah. Okay. Just 1 second. Commissioner Mancini, Chief Mancini, you
Madam
want to
Chair,
weigh in on that?
no, if I may, could we have the assessor sworn in if he's going to give any testimony this evening?
Okay, fine. Madam Assessor, would you please come forward, we're gonna swear you in, and we're going to, enter your testimony. Madam Clerk, please swear her in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and title for the record, please.
Janice Muscatelli, City Tax Assessor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do you want to sit down?
Sure.
Please join us.
I'll just sit back at the top.
For the benefit of the commission, please join us at the table. I'm sure we can squeeze you in some way. Great, that's perfect. We like elbows on the table.
So, should I?
Okay,
continue to
please,
respond?
yes, for the record, please respond, and if you're not satisfied, Commissioner Driver, you're free to ask any, further probing questions.
So the university is a tax exempt under state legislation. So that's simply just the answer to the question.
So even though they're making money from tuition, there's tuition, there's two sides, right? So my kid lived at home, I pay a certain amount. I don't understand, like, why, how did this come about? Like,
Well, I don't know the history behind why the legislation was passed, but it's been in the books.
But I have two multi-families, I live in one, so I get the benefit of it, but I pay taxes because I make money from rents. Anyway, so.
I have a son who goes to Johnson.
Are you all set, Assessor? Okay, yeah, no, thank you. You're totally. This to-do list,
I have
please
a-
jump in.
I have a son who goes to Johnson and Wales, and I'm lucky my wife actually is a professor there, so we don't have to pay for tuition. So I agreed for him to pay room and board, and it's over $20,000 a year to share a dorm room. I don't think a couple blocks away, okay? It will be cheaper for me, for him to move into my most expensive apartment than for what I'm paying for 9 months during the share of a dorm room. The colleges and universities, it's a huge cash cow for them. I've gone up and for our organization and testified up at the State House, starting with Mayor Tavares and City Council to try to get them to change that law to give the city a little bit more leverage. I just have two other real quick points that came up. You had mentioned one of the things about the assessments and our single family houses going up. The problem is that they go up and down, especially in different parts of town, but it's like, it goes crazy. So for many years, what we've advocated, and I think you would have to get enabling legislation, but have like a 3 assessment average, and then when you do the next assessment, you throw out the oldest one, and then you use that. Because it's true, if you look at the assessments on a lot of houses, especially the east side is a little more stable, it'll go down a little bit, and it'll go up, but other parts of town, it's been, a yo-yo. And that's what's been really making stuff tough on the council and trying to figure out how to do these things. The only other thing I just want to mention is there is also a way to do a homestead, and again, this isn't gonna, based on where my properties are, it's not really gonna help me. But another way to do homesteads that is more progressive is to have a single amount that like no one pays on the first 100,000 or something, 200,000, whatever it is. That way the poorer parts of town get a little bit of a break. And even the landlords in those parts of town get a little bit of a break, because if they have to buy a new furnace, and I have to buy a new furnace, it's the same thing, but I'm, for my place on the east side, I'm getting, 50% higher rent. So in our organization, and a lot of us are just on the east side, where we're like, all right, that's fair. It's gonna hurt us, but at least that's a fairer way to do it. If we wanna be progressive about these taxes and give breaks, and what that would do is incentivize people to build more buildings and more units in the other parts of town. As the taxes won't be so
Okay,
high.
thank you, Mr. Dooley. I interrupted you. You wanted to jump in. I'm sorry. Would you like to
Oh, I would, thank
ask a
you.
question now?
Yeah.
Please go right ahead.
I had kind of a comment and a question. One, the comment first is just looking at the examples that, and thank you for this presentation, I should have said that first. Sometimes I just get right in. But looking at the presentation and some of the examples that you gave, I think I'm just less like taken aback than I think was presented with some of the changes. It seems like it might be more of a result of the valuation than the taxation and the vagaries and the valuation. Like I'm looking at the east side example because I live on the east side and I represent the east side. The multifamily house, the valuation of that went up like 2.8, like 2.8 times. Whereas the valuation of the single family house of the former councilwoman only went up 1.5 times. So like, of course, the tax bill is gonna go up more. I'd have to do some more math to figure out, how much it should have, but like, it went up significantly more in value than the small single family home, which is like a one floor house. And it's kind of the same here on your other
But
presentation.
it went up, I'm sorry.
Oh, please.
To answer your question. The increase was 56% it went up, and the other one actually went down 70%.
Yeah, I know it's like, I want to do a little more math here to figure out like what the difference, so there, I see that there is a difference here, but like this one,
And
like
still
the
a single
apartments
family.
went up double, and then the rent went up double, or the taxes went up double, so it's a little bit like, yeah, the valuation went up double, the taxes went up double,
Well, like in a single family house though,
yeah.
like the little one, the valuation almost doubled,
Mhm.
and the tax bill actually went down
Yeah,
17%.
yeah, I see it went down, I'm just saying like the amount it went up, which is 1.5 times, versus the multifamily is like almost 3 times, so it is like a significant difference in how much the valuation went up, so I'm just wondering how much of this is the valuation changes versus like the actual taxation
Well, that's
changes,
why I went around.
and what tool we wanna go for, yeah.
Yeah,
Is just a question I'm having. And then the question I had is, do you have a sense of what this is like in places outside of Rhode Island, the homestead exemptions? Has your organization looked at that? Because I think in general, like none of our cities or towns have figured this out. We have a housing crisis in almost all of our cities and towns. So that's a question that I'm just gonna ask one more because maybe I'll answer the both at the same time is we've mentioned a lot that there's like, a difference between the large units and the large apartment buildings with many units and the smaller ones. Do we see like a correlation in like fluctuations in rent due to the different taxes in those different types of structures? So like, are the big ones, like the big buildings that are getting taxed at a different rate and the small buildings that are getting taxed at a different rate, are we actually seeing that change in rent play out because of the taxes? Like, is there actual correlation data for that? Or is that kind of like we assume that that's just getting passed on because there's a difference? Or is there potentially like landlords are eating some of that and like keeping it themselves? Not to say, I've mostly lived in apartments for most of my adult life, and I've had amazing landlords who have like given me all sorts of breaks, and some who have definitely been like not giving me any breaks. So it's like, I'm just kind of wondering, like, is
And the problem is the ones who give you the breaks, they
Yeah.
get creamed too. Like,
Yeah.
shotgun approach. I have an old elderly lady who's lived in one of my buildings for 60 years. And I've owned this building for over 20. I have raised her rent for 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay? I can't do that if my taxes keep getting creamed.
Yeah.
But
But like, do you see that like correlation? Like, you seem like you'd be a great landlord. Are there some, I don't know, but like, is there like correlation data that like because the taxes are different in these different
I
units.
could be a great landlord, but I can't afford to lose money.
Yeah, no, I get that, I'm just
That's what I'm
wondering what the
saying.
data
I'm
actually
sorry,
says.
like, are you asking if the,
Like, is it
when
always
we know
passed
the
on?
rents are higher?
Yeah.
And we've seen that the taxes are double, over double, so isn't that a correlation? Like you need more, like a more
Like,
specific
for like the
correlation?
actual, like, not this, but like for like a large apartment building, are we actually seeing that the changes in rent or the condo association, like, is that due to actually the difference in taxes? Like, is that correlated to like what the difference in taxes?
I think there's, like, I think I alluded to, there's many things that make the market
Yeah.
of what you can charge in rent. But a big portion of that is your expenses. And in Providence, property tax is one of the biggest expenses at, 25% of your gross rent, so, on those type of buildings. And also, some of the big buildings you're talking about, maybe newer luxury buildings, and they have probably some of the highest rent in the city, but, if you want the amenities, you will pay, but,
The problem is like what I was alluding to at the beginning, when this all started 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, it's these smaller ones in the poor parts of town. These guys, they got in, and I met a young man, and he had a couple of buildings, and after I met him, I was talking to him at the school, and he's pushing a push cart selling hot dogs.
Mhm.
And we were involved over there trying to help them get that pool and raising money, and we were there for the big grand opening. And I talked to him, I said, yeah, he looked at me, it's a big school. He said, what are you doing around here? And I said, well, we support these council people that did this, got this school open, a part of this landlord association, guys who were smaller. He said, oh yeah, I used to have 3 buildings. I said, yeah, that's great. He said, well, I had all one, I fixed it up, I lived here, then I went across the street, fixed that one up, and I bought another one around the corner, fixed that up. Then the housing crisis hit. It's like, now I was upside down in all the buildings. And then the city raised my taxes, like $500 a building, and I didn't have it. So all 9 apartments, all 3 buildings got foreclosed on, everyone got thrown out, they ordered them up, got broke in, ripped them all to pieces. And it's taken us 10 or 12 years to try to recover from that.
Mhm.
And that's the biggest thing, I'm just trying to get people to realize the unintended consequences sometimes, especially for these small guys. It is such a tight thing, and that's what happens. That is the direct result, all those foreclosures and stuff. There's a reason Providence let all of them meet foreclosures. It's because the numbers don't lie, right? It would have been bad. It was a housing crisis for everybody. But instead of trying to do things to mitigate it,
There were a number of other
Yeah, there
issues
were a lot of
going
things
on.
happening.
so
there are,
that's not-
but I'm just saying is
Let's not
this,
go there, that's a
Because I do think
bigger.
there's, like,
this is
unintended
gas in
consequences.
there.
That's why I want us to get to like what the
Yeah,
real.
well, I could speak to another thing, like when, and kind of what John was alluding to, if you have good existing tenants, they probably tend not to pay the market rent of the day. It's only when you have turnover and you might try to get that market rent, but I for one don't say, everyone, John just got 1,200 for that unit, and I gotta tell everyone in my building that now it's paid 1,200, because I think that's what the market will bear. I don't think that's what a lot of the landlords do to their good existing tenants, and I've also had a tenant that's been in one of my buildings longer than I've been alive. And, we don't increase his taxes, and his rent, he thinks, his rent, and, he tells me he's the super of the building, so.
Okay, folks, hold on just a second. We've got backed up questions here. Vice Chair DeGulis is next. Okay, and I've got Chief Mancini, so I'll go with Councilman
If you
Esposito.
want, I'll use my time and I'll.
Pick one, let's go.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice
I just
Chair.
want to make a point, and then maybe I'll defer and have a comment question later, but when we look at the 1 to 5 unit rental property, not owner occupied, the tax, and you have this, the effective tax rate schedule here. Providence used to have extremely high tax rate on those properties if they weren't owner occupied, and that tax rate has come down. Now it's 1835, which I think is a little above average. So I know there's envy for the homestead people because they're like getting a big homestead, but I guess my question is, would you agree it's hard to quarrel with the fairness of the residential rate for the 1 to 5 unit properties?
18?
Yes, 1835.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be higher, and now it's less because of what you
33.
mentioned.
No, everything
It's
is
going up
33.
because the property values have gone up, the tax bills. If you look at what the single family people are paying in tax bills, it's actually lower now than it was 10 years ago, and a great example I've looked at. And the individual tax bills for non-owner occupied properties is going up like 50%. It's the property values have gone up. But one of the biggest problems is it discourages people from building more stuff and getting more units.
Oh,
Please
but
continue.
this
Yes.
is, that 1835 is around average for the state of Rhode Island, I think. So we're in a city that's relatively expensive to run. I think that, by the way, and both of you have had a terrific presentation, and I think you hit on one of the most serious issues, which is that commercial tax rate on a 6 and above. But I think the 1 to 5, I understand like the homestead rate is extremely generous, particularly for people, but I'm not sure that there's a problem with that 1835, the non-occupied residential rate. So this is my opinion.
If I may respond, one of the things that we have always tried to do with PAA is keep the differential between the 1 and 5 unit taxes and the owner occupied tied to some sort of differential, which John has there. And I think we were trying to shoot for this six on that paper you were just referencing. We were hoping to stay with the 67%, paying 67% more than the owner occupies, and I guess now we're at 74.
Yeah, I think the city council even passed a ordinance at one point,
Yes.
and they overrode the mayor, Burris at the time, to lock it, I think it was locked at like 65, which again is still the highest homestead anywhere. And you asked about another around the country, I tried to research it. I haven't found anywhere in the entire country that was more than 35, okay? And that, it was either Detroit or Flint, Michigan, okay? So if we want to start emulating them, I think that might not be where we want to go. And again, I'm not saying you can't have a homestead. I'm saying a homestead in Florida is ridiculous, because you're giving a break to the wealthiest people in the city, and you're putting a bigger burden on the landlords who then have to raise their rent on the poorest people in the city. And that's who's paying it. It's not fair. And which is why, as I mentioned before, a lot of cities, what they do is they have a flat amount, like no one pays in the first $100,000.
Just one
Please
other
continue.
comment. I would just ask us not to, I know you didn't start it, but using the word homestead to refer to non-owner occupied property is extremely confusing, because a homestead is supposed to be about owner occupied property. So if we do what you're proposing and go back to a homestead, I hope we use a different nomenclature, because
It's very confusing, I agree. That
It was
literally
meant
said on
to
the tax
be.
bill. It literally said on the tax bill, non-owner occupied homestead. That's the city's.
I know it wasn't your, you didn't.
Couldn't have been you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam
Councilman
Chair.
Espinal, and then Chief.
Thank you, Madam
Please
Chair.
continue.
Yes, well, thank you to the presenter, Greg, and Mr. Dooley, for such an in-depth presentation about this, for being part of this discussion. You mentioned during the housing crisis, so we're talking and the how high the rents are. And you hit something that was very important as to what were some of the contributing factors for the rents being so high. And when you talk about 5 or 6 units, which is a very aging housing stock, and the cost of maintenance on that, which is something that's constant, is extremely important to consider that. But also, I would also add to that, which is being, not only are you being taxed on commercial rate, but also your water is also a commercial rate, your sewer. The insurance on a 6 unit, it's a lot, because you're looking at about $800 or $900 a month. And on an average, I think that a 6 unit in the city of Providence right now, and the tax assessor can correct me if I'm wrong, is about $18,000, which is about $1,500 a month. So if you add all those factors, you're looking at least $3,000 for you to own a 6-unit. And if you have a mortgage, plus the cost of maintenance. So those are factors, all that need to be taken into consideration. So I'm so glad that you bring that up.
That's a good point.
Really need to look further into.
I want to add one more thing is
Sure,
private trash collection once you reach 6 units.
Oh, good point.
absolutely. That is also gonna have your own dumpster, which
Yeah.
is, it's over, up so about $200 a month, 300. I just want to point that out as a consideration. We're trying to arrive at what's a better way of taxation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I've got Chief, I've got Segoris, and then Oscar Flores next.
Thank you,
Chief,
Madam
please.
Madam Chair, just a comment. First of all, thank you, Mr. Gould, Mr. Weiss. I know their work from prior testimony, and I know their association. I just will say, though, the housing crisis was not entirely created by taxation burden. We had, but we had a number of rogue lenders, and we had a number of improperly qualified borrowers that contributed. While I would agree that there may have been a burden of taxation that added to that, it's fair to say that it did not create the crisis in itself.
Thank you for making that clarification. I jumped in pretty harsh on that one too, and I appreciate you for following up. Councilman Vargas.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you for the presentation too. The issue that I see is a wave that came from 2021, about when COVID hit. So everybody was running away from the suburban to into the urban area, buying houses and paying high prices. And the value went up, skyrocket. And that's why the property taxes are paying more, and to compete with these values. And that's why we're seeing the taxes are increasing. They go with the way. And that's why this is a good meeting to look for solution, how we can modify and get everybody in the same way, like not to squeeze the other guy and have this one making money, this one losing money. And there's a wave coming down the pipe too, is all those people who's been paying $500,000 for those 3 family houses, they won't be able to support the mortgage in 3 years. Because when you lose a tenant, you lose $1,200, easy. And then when you lose a job, you lose the house. And that's another thing that we have to start thinking now, how we want to start watching this wave that's coming down the pipe. Thank you.
Commissioner Segoris.
Thank you. Let's see. One question for you, Greg, about your presentation here. When you said that the cost would go up per tenant, did you mean per unit, or are you talking about people?
That's confusing. I think I wrote that because in my mind, it should be per unit.
Okay.
I have a lot of one bedroom studios.
All right.
So in my thinking, it was
Just-
per.
Just checking, because it seemed like a lot. I thought
So if you meant
if
like,
it's
did
a-
I mean if it's a 3-bedroom per person?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I didn't mean that.
Okay. That's
For a tenant or per
Thank you.
unit is probably more.
I'm going to preface the next question by saying that I have a lot of sympathy with what we're talking about, both about the homestead exemption, shifting burden onto renters, and also about the sort of arbitrary nature of revals, and the way that your suggestion of smoothing is actually one that I suggested in a presentation last week. So starting with that basis, I'm going to ask a question that you may not like. And I think you've been pretty clear that tax increases, to the extent that you can, are passed along to tenants. I mean, that's what you're complaining, that the tax increases force the rents to go up. One of the obstacles that always seems to come up when you're talking about trying to undo some of the tax increases in the past is the uncertainty that those tax decreases, that any potential tax decreases would get passed along to tenants. And I am though I want to be complimentary to the people who are here in front of me, I think just as a generalization, I think it's very hard to make sure that that a tax decrease gets passed along to tenants. And I wonder if you have any policy ideas, policy suggestions, that in the event we came up with ways that would reduce the tax burden on you, are there ways to see that some of that relief gets passed along to tenants? Are there suggestions that you might have about that?
I have a hard time believing you're gonna see people reverse the rents on their tenants, only if there's more supply than there is demand. But what I can tell you is, yes, tax increases cause the rent to go up. And if you want that rent to stop going up, we should stop raising the taxes. Now, do I think all landlords are gonna say, my taxes went down, I'm gonna lower your rent? I don't think John and I mentioned that, but.
It's macroeconomics, right? And I don't know what everyone's background is when you study that stuff, but I did a little bit in college, and there are different factors, right? And this is one of them that puts up the pressure on the rents. It also is one that makes it more advantageous if someone wants to build, build a new triple decker or something in South Providence or somewhere else. Oh, tax sounds bad.
Yeah, and in fact,
numbers. A lot of people always ask me, so what I did, and say, well, what's.
And in fact, as backup research for the presentation that I gave last week, I was actually a little surprised to notice from analysis of 20 years of tax rolls that the number of apartment buildings and multifamily units was actually going down slightly over the past 20 years. And you know, in the midst of a housing crisis, that actually seems like something to be concerned about. But I was specifically asking if you had any policy suggestions for figuring out ways to do that, because I can totally see motivating changes in the tax code by by talking about the burden on renters. But it's hard to see how to actually relieve that because there are landlords. But hold on, one more question I have, which I think is either for the chair or for the solicitor. Early on in our discussion, I think maybe at the first meeting, when the solicitor's office presented some stuff, I asked if we could have a presentation about the structure and history of the circuit breaker, of the state income tax circuit breaker.
Yes,
And I wonder if we could revisit that.
We
because
will,
I think
we
it is
will.
relevant here.
we will. I've got that on our list of things to do. So that is a topic that we're gonna have a discussion on.
Okay.
If I could just follow up on that. So one of the things I mentioned is the current taxes, I think, they discourage investment without subsidy, and they discourage density in making 6 or more, you get that threshold, you're paying double the taxes. So one way to lower the rents is to build more units. Right now, our tax structure does not incentivize building more units, especially if you can't get a deal. So,
Okay.
well, I think we could incentivize building more apartments, you'd have more supply than demand, and naturally would happen what we want to happen.
And I just
Is
wanted to
there a
add,
demand, can I just ask, is there a demand for, you had mentioned, the reason I'm asking you this is that many of your renters are single occupants. Is there a demand for that type of
Oh, yeah.
occupancy?
Yeah,
Has that changed
there's a
over
lack
time?
of that type of unit in the city, studies the city has done it.
I've seen, many developers have come to me to see if they can, rehab, a single family unit in a commercial zone, in a commercial district that actually would be, an RP zone. And based on the square footage, you can put single units in, a multitude of single units in that single family property. So, I mean, I think that there is a desire, obviously, there's gotta be a market for it because there's developers that are out there trying to do it. So are you experiencing that? And can you
Yeah.
speak to that?
I think people like that unit because it's more affordable, usually small apartment, but they don't want to have roommates.
it's a lot of like young professional people in their twenties, okay? And I have a few of those, but not as many as Greg, but, and the demand, I don't even advertise it. Usually, someone will say, I'm moving out, they've been here for 7 years, and I have 3 friends that all want this apartment, you know? It's really cutthroat. And one thing I had suggested, I know the city, we had the people come in and survey and talk to us, an outside group and like that. One of the things they mentioned was we have all these multifamilies, and a lot of them, especially if they're like a 3-bedroom multifamily house, if you could split, and they used to do this, the first floor, now I can understand upstairs, you need egress, you need 2 ways to get out in case of a fire, but on the first floor, you don't have to do that. So if you could split the building and make 2 small apartments on the first floors, that would add a unit, same amount of square footage. The landlord would get a little bit more money for those 2 than he was getting for the one, like 2 or 3 bedroom unit. So it's worth it, it's an incentive for us to do it, but we need to make that easier to do. There are a lot of stumbling blocks.
Easier to do, but also you are mindful now of the number of units. You want to stay under that.
Right.
In this tax structure, you don't want to go to the.
Well, that's what I'm
That's another
speaking to.
component,
Once you do that, now you go up, and now all your other
Right.
things start to change, the fire regulations, and all these things. Even though same number of people, nothing has really changed, but it's much more expensive. And I just want to speak to it real quick, what you were talking about. Yeah, a lot of people saw what I did 30 years ago and were asking me about it, and they wanted to get into real estate. And I said, do the numbers. Look at what are the expenses on it, what are the taxes, what's the insurance, what's the thing, what's your income, what's your maintenance gonna be? And if it works, and I once had a real estate agent tell me, well, how much you looking to spend? And I said, well, I don't know, do the numbers, you figure it out. If it's a big black number at the bottom, I'm interested. I don't care if it's 100,000 or 500,000. If it's a red number, I'm not interested. And she's like, wow, whatever's just a way to look at it. That's the only way to look at it. And that's what happens with this thing. The reason we have 1,000 fewer units, or we were down slightly, it's actually come back a little bit in the last couple of years. So we lost about 1,000 buildings during this thing. And Larry, I never said he caused it. I said he threw gasoline on it. It was a bad situation, and it made it much worse. And we're still now finally trying to get all those buildings back online to what you saw that over the 20 years, we've gone up, we barely have any more. If you looked at the numbers, you looked 5, 6 years ago, I bet it's even less than we had 20 years ago.
Finish
A lot of
yourself.
buildings.
Very quick question. We've talked about getting data on rent increases in addition to cost increases, on revenue increases. Do you have, even if it's aggregated and not specific to any of your members, have you assembled any data from your organization on rent increases over the same period of time to compare to the tax increases over the same
We
period of
have
time?
not surveyed that data. I think everyone is aware of rent. It's gone up.
Yeah.
And the taxes have gone up. There's a correlation.
There is a correlation. To be intellectually honest about this, if
Yeah.
rent goes from $1,000 a month for the same unit to $2,000 a month, which that's not an unreasonable number to throw around.
Not without
It wasn't
investment.
caused by taxes.
What's that?
It wasn't caused by taxes.
Yeah.
So, but if a two-bedroom unit goes from $1,000 in 2018 to $2,000 in 2022, post-COVID, and the taxes go up 30%, there's still a 70%
Well,
gap in the cost. Now, you've also had utility increases, there's inflation, but to get back to the macroeconomic, the ROI on residential units generally has improved in Providence, even with the taxes. I'm still an advocate that we should treat apartment buildings differently than other commercial properties.
Well,
And we should be more equitable in the assessment.
Yeah.
But there has been inflation in rents as well.
Right, well, I've been a landlord for 30 years now, okay? And there have been years where it didn't go up. My expenses, my taxes went up, and I was not able to raise the rents.
I agree.
Right, and I just took that on the chin, and that's when all those places got foreclosed on, okay?
Yeah.
I was able to survive because I also had a construction business, and my wife worked.
Yeah.
So we were actually almost losing money on our.
And
I'm just saying this, a lot of people, and sometimes people talk about, right, I actually did do the numbers on my thing. I have not raised over like 30 years or something
Fair response.
close to, like, I think I figured it out, it was something over 30 years, like compounding, it would have been, if I raised it like 2.5% a year or something like that.
Fair enough, and I recognize that this should, it should be a long view discussion, we shouldn't overreact. But we shouldn't change tax policy on a short-term issue either.
Well, what you just said, you said if the taxes went up 30%. Now, I'm looking at this thing, and the average taxes in 2015 went from 26,000 to in 2023, 51,000.
Just wanna make sure, I'm
Over
sorry.
200%. Some people here are more
Which,
mathematically equipped than I am, but
yeah, so which slide, I'm sorry, this is in your packet?
yeah, it's actually, I got it from someone else here, but.
Yeah.
So that's.
So it's like the taxes doubled, and the residents, you know. The other thing is, I haven't had, in that years, what will usually happen in that situation, I don't know anyone who has doubled their rents on anybody.
Well, you have, if you significantly invested in that unit, you could potentially go from 1,000 to 2,000, but not by doing nothing.
Yeah, you gotta spend, 10
New
grand.
kitchen, new bathroom, maybe fix it.
Wait, anecdotal, that's, I really think would benefit us as a committee to get some better revenue that data as well. Because frankly, the perception is that there's been a significant inflation in rents over the last 7-8 years, in addition to inflation in taxes and all other adjustments. But we're all struggling with the right proportion of rent increases to expense increases. And I thought your most interesting and important slide was because representing developers and wanting to incent new development, our comparison of percentage of rent dollar that's spent on taxes in Providence is nearly twice the national average. And and we might want to dive into that data a little bit more too, to see how relevant that is to our discussion. Because that's a scary issue too. We're competing for capital dollars with Worcester and Bridgeport. We should know that where the rents are going.
I've got Councilwoman Andujar, and I've got Commissioner Segura next.
Mine is just a quick question, I think for the tax assessor, where does the 6 come from, that threshold? Do you know where, or maybe it's for Lisa Breeze, for Solicitor Breeze, like where in statute does the 6 unit threshold come from?
It's under classification statutes, 44.
It's state one.
Yeah, 511.
Private revenue,
Okay.
That's one of the things we want to look at.
Yeah, so
Is
that's
that-
not a ordinance, that's like.
I think it might be actually in your binders.
Okay.
Password goes out with the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's not fine. But we looked, I think Tom might have been looking on, the Commissioner Segura might have been looking on mine at the same time. We can go back to that stage.
I forgot.
Commissioner Segura.
I was just gonna make an observation about the, what we were talking about before. If the arbitrary nature of revals, that they jump up and down, if you combine that with the fact that rents tend to go up and not down, then you have a situation where the bouncing around sort of, there's a ratchet effect, it kind of pushes rents up and they don't wind up coming down. So it's just a way to say that sometimes the effects that we think are kind of small and unimportant actually wind up having a more significant effect because of other things that interfere. In this case, the sort of ratchet.
I would agree with you that rents are what you would call sticky in the way that they go up and down, but as soon as you see vacancy signs everywhere, the rents will go down precipitously. So that's all you need to know. We'll encourage more units to be built, rents will go down.
And then the problem is, if that happens, then you have vacancies, then you're gonna start seeing more foreclosures. Because guys aren't bringing in enough money to maintain the building if they didn't mortgage on it. Most people who own.
So you're saying we should restrict supply to keep your money, to keep your returns?
Quite honestly, that'd be great for me, because I bought in 30 years ago, but you know what, I actually care a lot more about the city.
We need more units.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's gonna fix this thing. I've been busting my ass for,
Okay,
for
folks.
30 years. But I'm
We
just
could go
saying,
on forever on this topic.
Yeah.
Okay, we appreciate your testimony. Does anyone else have a burning desire to ask these gentlemen any further questions? It's getting late.
I only have,
To ask these questions to these gentlemen?
no, more general thing.
Okay, so you can hold on that. So everybody's happy with the presentation? No further questions on this topic?
Thank
Okay,
you. Thank you.
wonderful. I want to thank you very much for your presentation, for preparing the documents for this commission. It was very helpful. I think you pointed out an issue that we need to address, and I think that this commission is willing to look at that. So once again, appreciate your time and your presentation. I am going to have this list of follow-up on some of your thoughts to see what we would need to do with legislation or what the math is on that. All right. So
Thank
you
you,
guys
thank you
are.
for having us.
Oh, our pleasure.
And if you might need us after this meeting, we're available.
We appreciate that. Thank you
Thank you.
very much. Okay, folks, so there's nothing else on our agenda. However, I do want to say that I've asked the solicitor for circuit breaker presentation. That's coming. That's forthcoming. We've just got a lot going on, a lot of data requests or there's a lot of demands on every department right now. So I'm trying to manage my way through that as the chair. So our next meeting, how does the 6th look for everyone? I think it's a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Do we have that available, clerks, Madam Clerks first? And does that work on everybody's schedules? And what's up? I need you, Chief, on that one. What's up is for discussion is the commercial real estate discussion on maybe talk about the fact that it's so high, why it's so high, what can we do, why is Providence, why is our commercial tax rate so high?
Madam Chair, just for your information, I'm at the Tiverton zoning board
Okay,
next Wednesday.
okay, I'm gonna have the clerks circulate a survey to figure out when we're best available, okay? I want you guys all in. We've got a few more weeks, we've got a lot to get through, and I'm trying to keep everybody on track.
Are we doing before?
So the 4th,
I
yeah,
have a
that,
community
okay.
meeting. I might have to maybe move that. I hate to do that. 10 years, I've never missed my Monday community meeting
Oh.
once a month. But this is an important topic, so maybe, is the 4th good for everyone?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
I knew you guys were gonna say.
we were uniformly impressed with the chairs blocking us out of all these dates 2 months ago, so.
All right, so the 4th, we'll move forward on the 4th.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So clerks, can you make sure we're queued up for that?
Yep, we are locked in on that date.
Okay, Commissioner Sagoras, you had a question?
There's a couple of things. One is, I wonder, there were some questions that I tried to ask of the vision appraisal.
I haven't gotten anything back. I have to follow up on that. I'm sorry. That's me.
If I could ask you to tester them for me, that
I
would be great.
will, I will. I have 2 open requests from you. I'm
Okay.
working on them.
And the circuit breaker, that's
No,
free,
free.
right? I'm a very demanding
I was
guy.
already addressing it.
Very engaged. Very engaged.
Another one that I'd like to suggest is that I'm aware of some research that has been going on in the city clerk's office about models from other states that would be worth adopting, or would be worth our consideration. And I wonder if we could schedule a short presentation
In the
about
clerk's
that.
office? I don't know.
Not the clerk's office, the city council staff. Staff, the
Okay,
policy
well,
office.
whatever they're doing, they'll be doing with me, so as soon as it's ready for presentation, we'll give you the benefit of that.
Okay.
There's a lot going on, sir.
And then the other thing is, I'm just sort of curious how we're going to structure the results of this. I mean, is there going to be time scheduled that we discuss what goes into a final report?
Yes.
Do we have a final?
We're gonna have a final report, you're gonna look at it, we're gonna sit down, and we're gonna bang it out at this table. We're gonna make recommendations, and then we'll all agree or disagree. That's how it works.
Okay, and do we expect that on the next agenda or the one after?
We're trying to fit that all in.
Okay.
We have to be done by the end of December, so
That's,
we're gonna move quickly.
that's exactly my point, is that I started thinking about, the Mondays between now and the end of December, like,
If we need to meet more frequently, we will.
okay,
But yes, we're a lot on our plate, but we've also covered a good deal of material. I don't think that it's any surprise on what's before us, and I think that I've learned enough from your comments and your thoughts that we can put together a draft report. You know, we do need some more materials that we need to get through, but we can get there. I have every confidence that we're close. All righty, what else? I think that's it. So it's the 4th. I've got to cancel my meeting. With that, may I have a motion to adjourn made by Vice Chair Duvier, seconded by Councilman Esposito, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you. You'll be great.
Taxpayer flood there, I love that.
Larry,
Did you talk to
Shimon? It's only.
I have.
It's only her.
We had a discussion to talk about banking opportunities, but
I don't know what to present or suggest here.